Magic's Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth set introduces over 121 new legendary creatures to the game, both through the main set and commander product. Picking out what commanders you want to build or even look at building can be really tricky with so many options, so I'll be taking a look at my 5 favorite commanders from the set and talking a little bit about why they're my favorite and how I'm planning on building the decks around them. This should be a lot of fun, so let's jump into this, starting with number 5, that being Gandalf the Grey. Gandalf the Grey is a 5-cost blue and red 3/4, and it says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, choose one that hasn't been chosen. You may tap or untap target permanent. Gandalf deals 3 damage to each opponent. Copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. You may choose new targets for the copy, and put Gandalf on top of its owner's library. This is obviously an instant and sorcery deck. It's not trying to hide that, but I think it's a lot more versatile than that, and that's part of what puts it so high up on this list. First off, all 3 abilities outside of the one putting him on top of his library are very powerful, but I think the most powerful is the one that copies instants or sorceries you control. Allowing you to double one of your spells is very powerful, but the big issue with Gandalf here is that you only get to choose each one once, and that doesn't mean once per turn, that means once as long as Gandalf's on the battlefield. So a big part of this deck is actually going to be getting around that, and that can be done in a couple major ways. You can either use his bottom ability to put him on top of your library, draw him again, and then replay him, and you'll get to use the top 3 abilities all over again. Or you can use cards that, for instance, flicker him or return him to hand or do any of those style of effects, and those allow you to reset his abilities. I think the most powerful of those is going to be those flicker effects. I think the most powerful of those flicker effects are going to be cards like Displacer Kitten, which says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you get to flicker a creature you control, meaning you can cast an instant or sorcery, copy it with Gandalf, and then flicker Gandalf, and then the next instant or sorcery you cast, you can just do the same thing. It essentially gets rid of the downside if you have Gandalf and Displacer Kitten, but you can also just have instants and sorceries that flicker him. For example, Ghostly Flicker or Essence Flux are both great examples of cards that do that, and then you can use his other abilities like the one that deals 3 damage to each opponent when you're using those effects. You can also use cards like Thassa Deep Dwelling or Conjurer's Closet to flicker him every turn so that you're at least getting a new effect every single one of your turns. It's also obviously going to run cards that care about instants and sorceries like Gutter Snipe and Stormkiln Artist, which are just must runs in instant and sorcery based decks. It is it by the way, but you can also run cards that care about the number of times you've cast your commander because of that bottom ability. You can actually run things like Echo Storm or Fury Storm, and then because you can, recast your commander without commander tax thanks to that bottom ability, those could be very, very high numbers. It just adds values to instants and sorceries in a really flexible way. I think it's a very overdone theme, that being blue-red instants and sorceries, but I look at this card of less of a payoff and more of a utility belt for those decks, and I think that's what makes it so interesting, is that it's taking this idea of blue-red instants and sorceries and not just saying when you do this, get good value. It is you get to pick what is the best in the right situation, and it's almost a game of resource management when it comes to choosing when you want to use his abilities. And because of that, it's really, really interesting to me, and I think he's going to be one of the most fun commanders from the set. Next up, number 4 is Shelob, Child of Ungoliant. It is a 6-cost black and green legendary creature spider demon, and it's an 8/8 with Death Touch and Ward 2. And it actually gives your other spiders Death Touch and Ward 2 as well. Then it says, whenever another creature dealt damage this turn by a spider you control dies, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's a food artifact with pay 2, tap, sacrifice this artifact, you gain 3 life, and it loses all other card types. This is obviously a spider commander deck, and we've seen spiders that are legendary before that care about spiders. Things like Iskana and Arasta have been around in the past, but they are not that powerful and not that fun. This is the first one that I think is both powerful and fun. Let's break it down line by line. First off, an 8/8 for 6 with Death Touch and Ward 2 is very aggressively costed, and then it gives all of your other spiders Death Touch and Ward 2. That's more than most other spider commanders have done in the past, and this has a whole nother ability, and it's actually the most interesting one. The last ability means that whenever your spiders are killing your opponent's creatures, which should happen all the time because they have Death Touch, you get to take that creature on your side of the battlefield, but it's no longer a creature, it becomes a food. And so you want to kill creatures that have really awesome effects, but you don't really care about the power and toughness of those creatures. So you're going to want cards in your deck that allow you to fight or have your creatures deal damage, because this specifically does not care about combat damage, and your opponents are not going to put their important creatures like like Blood Artist in front of your spiders because they know that you'll be getting a copy of them that's pretty difficult to interact with. So you're going to want those cards like Bite Down and Ram Through to allow you to deal damage without having to actually go to combat and have your opponents block. There's also some really interesting cards that force your creatures to be blocked or force your opponents to attack. Things like Goad can be really good in the deck as well. There are also foods, which mean you can sacrifice them, meaning if you have some artifact synergies, caring about when artifacts are put into a graveyard or whenever you gain life, those can also be kind of niche picks in here because you are making foods and not just traditional artifacts. You'll also want cards that care about Death Touch. The biggest one that comes to mind is Finn the Fangbearer, meaning that your opponents are really going to be incentivized to block your spiders because if they don't, they are getting poison counters, which in Commander are extra deadly. Overall, it's a fun card in a heavily requested creature type that lets you play with your opponent's cards. That checks a lot of the boxes for fun and popular commanders, and it's pretty hard to interact with because of that Ward 2, which makes up for it being a 6-cost commander in a lot of situations. Overall, it looks really cool. Alrighty, next up is Bilbo, Birthday Celebrant. This is a white, black, and green legendary creature halfling rogue 2/3, and it says if you would gain life, you gain that much life +1 instead, which is a pretty powerful effect, but nothing game-breaking on its own. Then you can pay 2, a white, a black, and a green, tap it, and exile him to search your library for any number of creature cards, put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Activate only if you have 111 or more life. Now, obviously, this card is kind of ridiculous, and it's obviously a life gain deck, but I think what's really interesting about this is that it kind of gives you an alternate win condition without being an alternate win condition. I think we all know that if you get to search your library for any number of creatures and just put them on the battlefield, you are going to win. And this basically says if you can get to 111 life, you win the game. So this is obviously going to be a basic life gain deck, but instead of just stalling, like a lot of life gain decks do, where they get really high up in life, and it's kind of hard for them to turn that life into value, this is giving you a way that says I am going to end the game and this is my way how. And because of that, it actually means the deck doesn't need a ton of other cards outside of ways to gain a ton of life. So you're going to want cards that are going to give you a lot of life. Things like Soul Warden, Cleric Class, Suture Priest, and Rock's Faithmender are all cards that are going to help you get a bunch of life. And when you combine those with Bilbo, who's increasing the amount of life you get per trigger, it can be pretty powerful. Now, specifically in this deck, you are going to want to gain a lot of life through lots of individual triggers to get the most advantage out of your commander, because if you would gain life, you gain that much +1. You're not doubling your life gain, you're just adding 1. Now, while Bilbo can be your way to win the game using infinite combos like Heliod and Walking Ballista, or by getting haste enablers like Surak and Goreclaw, or Reflex Liver and Mirror Entity, or Odric and any creature with haste, you are going to probably want cards that can win the game in other ways. I can see this deck really becoming an archenemy type of deck because people do know that once you get to 111 life, the game is over. It's not just you get to 111 life and you get a decent amount of value or something they might be able to overpower. The game is pretty much over if you get to that point. And so I do think having other ways to win the game like Vito, Thorn of the Dusk Rose, or Heliod Suncrown can be really good in this kind of deck. In addition, cards like Lothiel and Archangel of Thune are also going to give you some benefits for gaining life. But I think this deck is really fun in the fact that, yes, it is just a life gain deck, but the way you win at the end kind of gets to be your own style. Just a really interesting deck because it is an alternate win con in the command zone, which we just don't see a ton of. Following that up, we have Tom Bombadil, which is a Wooburg legendary creature god bard 4/4. And it says as long as there are 4 or more lore counters among sagas you control, Tom has hexproof and indestructible. And whenever the final chapter ability of a saga you control resolves, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a saga card. Put that card onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. This ability triggers only once each turn. This card is crazy fun, and it's something that players have been asking for quite some time. Sagas were first introduced in Dominaria, and they've been in a lot of sets since, like Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, March of the Machine, lots of sets, and even including Lord of the Rings. And we've gotten to the point where we have so many sagas, but we don't have a great commander to run them. Yes, we've had Satsuki the Living Lore, and really any Enchantress commander, but really we needed something that was Wooburg so you could fit every saga, and one that really was able to benefit from the saga gameplay. My big issue with current saga decks is that they kind of just play like normal enchantment decks, but they just get a little less stacksy, whereas this is going to take advantage of sagas in particular. We've actually seen a couple cards that aren't legendary, and even one that is, that do care specifically about sagas, but this feels like it will be the saga commander, similar to how Go Shintai is now the Shrines commander, where before that you had to run a couple, janky commanders that kind of worked. Now we have one that's specifically built for sagas and can fit all of the sagas you have. The value on this also just seems pretty good. You kind of get this loop going where you can be spending your mana on other things and your sagas just keep coming in. Now you don't get a ton of control about what's coming in, so cards like Sensei's Divining Top can be really helpful as it lets you kind of pick the next saga that's going to happen. Obviously, you're still going to want to run cards that care about enchantments like Sithis and Sanctum Weaver and Setessan Champion. You're going to want cards that care about when enchantments enter the battlefield specifically though, because with Tom's ability, you're not actually casting the saga, you're just putting it on the battlefield. So things like Eidolon of Blossoms is really good in the deck. The other thing to note is this ability only triggers once each turn, so you kind of want to time out when your sagas are going to be resolving. If you have 3 sagas that all go off on the same turn, that means that you will only get one new saga. But if you can get your sagas to go off on your opponent's turn, that can be extra powerful, and there's a couple ways you can do this. You can either give your enchantments flash through something like Leyline of Anticipation and then use read ahead sagas, which can be really cool, or you can have Proliferate in your deck to be able to dynamically change the number of lore counters on each of your sagas. It can also then be used kind of as a combat trick to give Tom Hexproof and Indestructible if he didn't already have it. I think that'll honestly be the key difference between a standard Tom deck and a powerful Tom Bombadil deck, is that the powerful ones are going to care more about manipulating the lore counters and being able to, get 4 different final chapter results in a turn cycle as opposed to just doing it once on your turn. And I think that'll be kind of the big thing there. Either way, very awesome commander. I expect to be seeing a lot of this guy. Alrighty, the final one, what I think is the best commander from both of the sets, it is Aragorn the Uniter. He is a red, green, white, blue, legendary creature, human noble 5/5, and it says, whenever you cast a white spell, create a 1/1 human soldier creature token. Whenever you cast a blue spell, scry 2. Whenever you cast a red spell, Aragorn the Uniter deals 3 damage to target opponent, and whenever you cast a green spell, target creature gets +4/+4 until end of turn. Aragorn is interesting for a lot of different reasons, the first of which being he's a 4-color commander, which we really don't see often, and normally you have to use like partners to get up to 4 colors, or there is one in each 4-color combination. But I think he's a really interesting card because there is no set way to build it. Where Tom Bombadil has to pretty much be built as a Saga's commander in order to do anything, this can be built in so many different ways. This could just be 4-color good stuff, or it could be, in my opinion, one of the better ways to build it, a multicolor Matters deck that includes cards like Faebro Elder and Hero of Precinct 1, alongside things like Knight of New Alara and Renee, Angel of Rebirth. All of these cards care about cards having lots of colors. You can also run some of the cards from New Capenna that care about cards being exactly 3 colors, as you'll get a lot of advantage from Aragorn getting to trigger 3 of his different abilities. I just think the deck is super powerful in the fact that it is so versatile. I can imagine this card commanding a bunch of different archetypes. This could just be a good stuff deck. It could very easily be a control deck that's just trying to get value. It could be a Voltron deck trying to buff him up with his bottom ability, or a token deck that cares about the top. It could be a lot of different things. Artifacts are probably the least likely because they're colorless, but enchantments could really take advantage of this, allowing you to kind of build up an enchantment fort while dealing damage with that red ability. And it just reminds me a lot of Kenrith the Returned King, who is a Wooburg commander who could really be built in any way you wanted, and I think that's honestly the best type of commander. I like commanders that don't scream do this because they breed innovation when it comes to building a commander deck. Creativity and, getting to include niche cards that you weren't expecting, or throwing your opponent off. There are certain decks that when I sit against, I know that they're running, this list of cards because that's how you build the deck. But I feel like if I run into one of these decks, it could be built in any number of ways, and I think that's what makes it really interesting. Overall, those are my top 5 picks for my favorite commanders from the Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth. Let me know what commanders you guys are excited about in the comments down below, and if you want to see another one of these with 5 more awesome commanders from Lord of the Rings, let me know. There are over 100, so I could technically keep doing these for a while. If you want to see more content before my next video, check out these 2 videos here. This one where I talk about the top 10 most expensive cards in Lord of the Rings, and this one where I talk about what exactly is in a collector booster for this set. See you guys in the next one. Bye.